All right, welcome everybody to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. Really honored to be hosting this discussion today. Before we get started, make sure to do those basic things and like the video, hop on your social media, share it with folks, let people know this conversation is happening now, and share it with folks afterwards. Especially if you find it gratifying or meaningful in some way. Um, I'm really, honored again, as I said, to host our guest today. Steve Salaita received his PhD from the University of Oklahoma. He is currently professor of English and comparative literature at the American University in Cairo. Salaita is also the author of 8 books, including Internationalism, Decolonizing Native America and Palestine, Uncivil Rights, Palestine and the Limits of Academic Freedom, and Modern Arab American Fiction, A Reader's Guide. And obviously, because there's 8 of them, there's 5 more that I didn't mention. And in addition to that, he also has a fiction book that's coming out in May, a novel, that's coming out on Common Notions Press, so people keep an eye out for that as well. The book we're gonna talk about today, is entitled, An Honest Living, a Memoir of Peculiar Itineraries. I'm smiling a little bit because I keep writing that out everywhere as particular itineraries, and I had to like go through and correct everything, but I think it's still wrong on my Twitter post. So apologies to Stephen for that. But anyway, I mean, I'll say more as we welcome Steve to the show. Shout out to the folks listening in the chat. Thank you. And I'll bring Steve to the stage now. Steve, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
It's great to be in conversation again. Really appreciated our conversation in December, and I know a lot of other people, reached out and shared to me that they did as well. Um, I wanna, before we even get into this book, to just kind of thank you for writing this book and for sharing this. I think that it's I think one of the things I'll say is, like, with everything that we're experiencing right now with the genocide going on in Palestine and everything else, that I was somebody I think who's probably been fairly guarded with my emotions or affection or sadness or whatever over the years, and I've kind of lost any ability to sort of filter that. And that's probably a blessing in coming in, not the form that I would like it to come, obviously. But this book is it's deeply personal, and I'm sure it's not easy to write this personally, and difficult to kind of. I think it takes a great amount of bravery to also share this much about your own life, especially when you're going through a period that some might describe it as a low point. And I think that I appreciate all the ways I think the text challenges or pushes back against that assumption. Although you do have different struggles that you're very open about throughout the book too. And so anyway, I related to that as somebody who left the nonprofit world in 2021, and haven't really been back. I have a part-time gig now that I've started with Making World's books as well as this, but for a lot of that period I was alone with home with my kids. I was podcasting, obviously, and doing that kind of work, and there are times when that was its own form of alienation and challenge. Well, also that time with my kids was meaningful. And so anyways, this book is about a lot of things, but partly it's about that. And I just wanted to say that it really, some of those passages especially really resonated with me, as did other parts. And so I just wanted to thank you for this beautiful book.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I'm thrilled. I'm honored that it resonated.
Right on. So I think most people probably are familiar enough, so I don't think we have to go into too much detail. But I think if just situating this book and kind of the period that you're talking about would probably be helpful. And just saying a little bit about the events leading up to it. I mean, I jokingly sort of put in the question that, like, they have their own Wikipedia pages, and so people can go read about them. And you've written about them, obviously, and talked about them elsewhere. And so I don't we didn't, that's not going to be the crux of this conversation. But just give folks a thumbnail of kind of the events, I guess, that sort of bracket this book and then the period that it covers in between.
Uh, Absolutely. Really, it in 2014, I was fired from a tenured position at the University of Illinois for, tweets about Gaza, condemning Israel, condemning Zionism, really, and that it kind of exploded into a national story, about Palestine, about free speech, about academic freedom, and so that situation entered into the news cycle, and a lot of people were following it. And I fought very hard, to get my job back, and unsuccessfully. They held firm, as the ruling class is apt to do. So the following year, I ended up getting a visiting position at the American University of Beirut, and I was there for 2 years. And I also ended up getting pushed out of AUB. They hired me, a search committee hired me for a permanent position there, but the administration at the behest of, I guess, pressure groups from the United States, including some U.S. politicians, including some U.S. senators, which continues to shock me, rescinded that appointment, and I couldn't get a job, an academic job, anywhere else. So this was 2017. I was in Beirut from 2015 to 2017, and in the summer of 2017, I went back to Virginia, the DC suburbs, with my wife and my child. And really, I wasn't doing anything. I was trying to write, sort of trying to process everything that happened, but it took me a long time, for the realization to hit you're not getting another academic gig. It's done. They're finished with you, and so you're going to have to sort of deal with this reality. So eventually, my wife went back to work, and she was, sort of keeping us afloat and above water. She's always been extremely heroic throughout all of this. Just has been remarkable, holding our family together, keeping us functioning and all of those things. And then, after some time, I realized I have to do something. You know, I wanted to do something, and by the way, over this period, and this is something I've never really written about. People would try to get me gigs, part-time gigs, and they always got shot down. So there's a whole series of attempts to get me back in the classroom, and they never worked. Sometimes they get approved at various stages, but always when it got to the upper administrative stage, they said no, absolutely not. And so the reality kept coming that this is done for you. So I started driving a school bus, and I did that for a while, until I think from late 2019 until the pandemic hit, or maybe late 2018 until the pandemic hit. It was a little less than 2 years all told, including training, and then I was sort of cast adrift again. And eventually, I saw an ad for a position at the American University of Cairo. I thought, why not give it a try? And I ended up getting the job, and I've been here in Cairo. This is my second year here, and so that's kind of my story. So the book, An Honest Living, really focuses on that period between 2017 and 2022. Those 5 years when I was out of the classroom, away from the profession, and really just sort of explores how I made sense of that situation, how I got through that situation. And I want to really, really quickly go on an aside that I think is still relevant, and say to anybody who might be listening who's going through these employment difficulties because of your vocalness about the current genocide, to keep strong, reach out, don't be afraid to ask for help. Your comrades and your friends and your colleagues, probably won't, should come to your aid. And the most important thing is that you want to look back on it, on this period, as horrible as it is, and say, I never buckled, I never gave in, I did the right thing. And hanging on to that is going to be super important for you as you live the rest of your life, whatever field you go into. You can get back into the classroom, maybe you'll get your job back, maybe you'll move into a different profession, but you'll want to be able to look in the mirror and say, I didn't cave, they didn't break me. So keep strong, and keep doing your thing.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I appreciate any opportunities too to connect your story to the present moment, because I think it's really obviously it must be kind of an interesting process. Like, you wrote this book and it's coming into the world at this specific moment, and obviously it's not a book that's trying in any way to kind of capitalize or monetize this current moment. It doesn't actually address itself very much to to Palestine or the struggle of Palestinians or Zionism. It's more kind of the impacts of what this process, of Zionists, kind of pushing you out of, and of academia and their acceptance of that, and then, in many ways, it's a critique of capitalism. I mean, you're quite open about that at certain points in the writing of it, and I appreciated all of that, and just, I think there are a lot of ways that we can draw connections, because there are a lot of people right now who are worried about speaking out, who are, facing, already suspended or under investigations or whatever because of things that they have said. And, I think it's really important that we continue to show up for those folks, but also for those folks to know that, there are people out here that have been through these experiences, but also who care about them and want to support them as well. So appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Um, so this is a personal thing I'll share too. Is like, there's a song that my father used to play when I was going to school. He'd drive me to school in the morning, and it's kind of a funny song to listen to as a kid. And I remember his song is called "Jimmy Come Lately," and it's by a folk singer named Fred Small. And it's about a guy who quits coaching college basketball after, he doesn't describe exactly, but based on the lyrics, it sounds like he kinda had a meltdown, or like a kind of, couldn't get basketball out of his head, kind of thing, and just sort of decided to walk away. And he drives a school bus, right? And, the chorus has this line, "I'm crossing Dean's Creek with a 30 kid load, and I'd rather be nowhere but here." And uh, as a kid, this was an interesting song, and I remember talking to my father about it actually as a kid and saying, like, "I don't really understand what this is about. What does this mean?" And my dad saying, "Well, it's really a commentary about, dignified work, and about that, there's nothing wrong with, our society has in many ways taken certain forms of labor and said they are less than, that if you do these things, that why would anyone want to leave college basketball coach, you're in the spotlight and everything else, and drive kids on a school bus, and so there's obviously very different circumstances here. I know that you didn't make a active choice to say, I'm going to quit the university and drive a school bus. Like, you were pushed out because of your political commitments. Um, and but anyways, there is this aspect of the book that you're also engaging with, um, and that sort of question, and it's a tension I think that you felt from other people of, how are they going to, how would they perceive this? I'm sure you felt it yourself, right? On some level of like, having to think about the ways our brains are wired around ideas of success, and what it means to make it, and all of those sort of things, and deconstruct some of that. And so, anyways, talk about some of that. Talk about some of the aspect of the changing careers for you, and talking about those perceptions and kind of struggling against those perceptions.
It's a loss of status, which which I try to explore in the book. I can say that it didn't bother me, this loss of status, but I had to grapple with it. It's you're in a completely different world socially and economically, and so people's perceptions of you differ. The Zionists online, had great moments of glee. They were kind of, haha, look at this guy. He's driving a bus now. And so they would always leave snide comments for me about, don't you have a bus to drive? Or, you're doing this, you're doing that. Just the kind of shit you would expect from those people. Well, I saw it differently. I saw it as connected to the sensibility in Palestine and among all oppressed people that I was trying to reproduce, and an ethic I was trying my best to live, not always successfully, but for me the idea was, if this is what it takes to not concede a solitary millimeter, then this is what I will do. And you cannot break me. You cannot defeat me by stepping in this bus and driving it. And it was a fine job. There are much worse jobs out there, much more difficult jobs, let me say. That was my way of saying I've made myself undefeatable in your eyes. That is to say, you can no longer threaten me. I'm no longer under your control. You have no power over me. You can stomp and complain and ridicule and all you want, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect my life anymore. And so I've taken that power away from you and given it back to me. And really, that's the attitude that I took into. That's the attitude I still take into it. That you know I'm back here in the classroom in Egypt. I'm never going to get back in the classroom in the United States. That's I've long come to terms with that, and I'm fine with that. I'm content being here, and I like where I live and I like where I work. But it if they come after me, like they did in Beirut, I have something to do. I don't have to worry. I can go to any small town in the United States, any suburb in the United States, and I can drive a city bus or I can drive a school bus. I have that skill, and I'm proud to have that skill. And I think that professors who are active in controversial issues, anti-Zionism particularly, where so many people are getting in trouble or getting fired, should have some sort of backup plan. And one of the problems with academic careers is that in graduate school you're trained for one thing, and that's to be a professor, that's to be a researcher. Well, I know it's difficult and not everybody has the ability to do these things, but consider what other types of careers you would undertake if academia doesn't work out voluntarily or involuntarily. Shit, learn welding. Get your CDL. I don't know. The old cliche says, "Learn to code." I don't know. Have some sort of backup plan, and in doing so, you take some of their power away. They can wrest you out of your first profession, perhaps your chosen profession, but they cannot stop you from putting food on the table, and they cannot stop you from living, and most important, they can't stop you from being who you want to be and saying what you want to say, what you feel like you need to say. And that's the attitude that comes out of Palestine itself. That's really the basis of decolonial, anti-colonial resistance there, that we will outlast you. The one power we have over you as an occupied people, as a colonized people, is our steadfastness, our endurance. So whatever you throw at us, we're going to be there at the end, standing and waiting to take our land back. And that's how I always thought of it. During those 5 years, particularly in the years when everybody was mocking me for having become a bus driver. That, you know, yeah, do your worst. Bring it, bring it. I'm going to be standing here at the end with my middle finger in my air saying "Free Palestine." And I think that's the attitude that we have to have. We have to, those of us in diaspora particularly have to match defiance and the steadfastness of those that we purport to support, who are going through much more difficult things, much worse things, much more harrowing things. And so, in terms of, I guess, how it positioned me in society, it did take some getting used to, but at the same time, honestly, I was proud of it. I was proud that I picked myself up off the ground and found something else to do, something that was satisfying and something that was meaningful and something that allowed me to have a positive impact on other human beings, in this case, school children. And that was profoundly meaningful to me. And very often I miss the hell out of it. So I can definitely understand that song. It resonates with me, that there's something incredibly satisfying about, delivering little kids to their parents in the evening, and watching their faces. And it's a beautiful thing, and not many jobs allow you to witness those kinds of beautiful interactions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely want to talk about that a little bit more as we get into the conversation, because there's some great, stories and interactions that you had through the process of that job that, were beautiful to read about and to, think about. And I guess, before we go further, I think I'll go to this question, which is sort of talk about how you see Zionism and capitalism or imperialism as fitting into this story. Um, you know, it as we've already said, you do they do come up in the story, and you do name them, you do address them. But it is a very interior book in a lot of ways. You understand the personal as being impacted by these structures and the ideologies they produce in profound ways. Um, and you do say that. So yeah, how do you process that? How do you think about Zionism and capitalism or imperialism as part of this story?
A three-headed monster attached to the same body that's relentless. And so it requires us in a lot of ways to be even more relentless. And that can be extremely difficult to do, but it's the backdrop to the entire story. And there's a lot of, there's some explicit critique of Zionism and capitalism and imperialism, but mostly it's implicit. And I'm trying to explore it at, sort of a personal level, and how it exists in our lives, in terms of our day-to-day relationships and our relationships with labor and economy. But for me, the very idea of losing status for upholding a specific political principle is a byproduct of capitalism, where so much emphasis is placed on one's class positionality within the imperium. For me, I wanted to buck that system, to reject that system. Zionism, just like capitalism, of which it is a part, is relentless. And that, even after they got me fired, essentially, well, fired from one position and removed from a second position, you know then they sued me. And so, I've been in and out of court, over the years. There's still a lawsuit pending from me and my colleagues, and so they're relentless in the sense that a punishment for a Zionist is never enough. They want to make you absolutely destitute, right? And you see that ethic in playing out in Gaza, right? That they don't just want to punish what they say are the perpetrators of October 7th. They want the entire society to suffer, and they want them to suffer until they're not here anymore. And they've made that abundantly clear. And so there's a vicious relentlessness to it that, in lots of ways, aligns with a vicious relentlessness of the ruling class writ large. And what I mean by that is there's no space in their minds for any kind of concession to the worker. There's no space in their mind for any kind of concession to a decent living, a decent wage, an honest living, right? a life with any kind of leisure or pleasure in it, that we're supposed to work nonstop to their benefit, and our bodies and our minds are supposed to rot away, while they sit on their yachts and reap profit, while sitting around doing nothing. And see, that's the thing or this is the connection that I tried to make, that with Illinois, when I sued them, the request was simple. I want my job back. I'm not asking y'all for money. I'm not asking for this. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for my job, which you offered me and signed off on. And they wouldn't concede a solitary inch. And you learn that anytime you have to do battle with the ruling class. They have this tremendous, loyalty to one another, and they never cede anything on principle. And so we have to kind of match that. We have to have a very strong class loyalty, right? We have to have very, very strong relationships with the downtrodden, with the oppressed, and we cannot concede an inch to the ruling class, right? We have to have the same attitude, because not then we're easy to divide, and in turn easy to conquer. And we see it happen over and over again. So capitalism is really the backdrop of the story. In lots of ways, Zionism is its material expression, or one of its material expressions, and all of it is about trying your best to keep it together and surviving the kind of destitution that they want to impose on those who refuse to meekly follow the rules, right, as they've set forward to their benefit.
Yeah, agree. Thank you. And there's like lovely, you there's some parts of the book where you talk about, for instance, like, meetings and professional developments with your colleagues and getting to know the other folks you were working with while you're driving the bus. I mean, that period and stuff like that. And, I really appreciated that. And the kind of, I think there was a comment that you made actually at one point, which was just sort of like, the most conservative or right wing bus driver had a much better understanding of class solidarity and working class politics than most of the most left wing academics that you had worked around.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah.
if that's right, but I think it was
Nobody,
something along those lines.
yeah, and nobody's siding with management. Do you know what I mean? They understand instinctively that, right? You side with your peers, you side with your colleagues, and there's yeah, obviously, people are people, and workplace politics are workplace politics, but it's just different, man. There's a whole different level of sneakiness and backbiting going on, in the academic world, and then I think in so-called white collar professions more broadly, that just really is anathema to the day-to-day attitude of those who work real jobs.
Yeah, right on. So, you also talk a bit about struggles with anxiety in this book, about like difficulty you have responding, to emails, struggles in social settings, social media, and how social media produces, forms of anxiety. And so I don't have a really well articulated question here about that. But I wanted to say that, I appreciated this. It's something that I know my eldest son has struggled with quite a bit. And I think actually reading your book, I'll be honest, like I started to think about certain things I've been dealing with lately and thinking like, oh, well, maybe I do have anxiety about that. Maybe that's why that is so difficult for me to follow through on that or do that thing. And so, anyway, I just wanted to share that because I think again, it's another area where, this book, it does a lot of different things, and one of them is just you're very open about, anxiety and other things that you struggle with. Yeah.
Blessings to your son, and I hope, and he will learn, to navigate some of these difficulties. But society doesn't. Society makes it more difficult very often than it needs to be, and workplace cultures make it more difficult than it needs to be. I remember I guess maybe during the pandemic, or maybe it was before the pandemic. I can't remember. There's a big family gathering, and there was a kid. There are a lot of cousins there running around. It's like 8 years old or something, sitting in the corner of the yard reading. And all the adults were like, what's he doing? What's he doing? Bring him here. What's wrong with him? What's wrong with him? Tell him to come play. Tell him to come eat. Do this. Do that. And finally, his dad stepped in and said, "Guys, leave him alone. He wants to sit there and read. Let him sit there and read." And it was a cathartic moment for me. It's like, yes, that why can't somebody just sit to the side and read and exist in peace? And think about it, right? We don't give one another that kind of grace and patience, and that very often is a trigger for anxiety, or worse than anxiety. I've never understood why people can't sit, on the bus or on the couch or wherever, near somebody, and just sit. And then there's these tortured conversations, and it's like, what's wrong with just sitting next to one another? You know, we can communicate beautifully, right? Without words. Sometimes we can communicate with our body language. But there's always people are trying to bring one another into the fold, and that's always for me been a trigger for anxiety. It's like, well, sometimes people don't want to talk. In academia, it's a real peril. It really is. If you keep like skipping social functions, and man, these social functions never end, right? People start wondering about you. Well, there's something wrong with that person, and he doesn't like us. God forbid somebody doesn't like us, or God forbid somebody doesn't want to play along. And you know, and I know there are a million other things to worry about in the industry. Don't get me wrong, and this probably just seems like a silly complaint, but I see it as more than a silly complaint. I see it as an unwillingness to leave people to process, their ability to interact with the world. And as the world grows more and more precarious, the worry is going to increase, and we need to give one another space to manage our grief, to manage our stress, and need to take on an attitude that, when they feel like talking, they'll approach us and talk. That get rid of the narcissism of always having to be altruistic. People will come to you when they need you for something, and you can come to them when you need them for something. But otherwise, you don't know what somebody is going through. Maybe it's very painful for somebody, to talk. Maybe it's painful for them to go out for drinks. Maybe it's painful for them to keep going to dinners, especially where there are going to be strangers there. And so, yeah, I mean, one thing in the book and in general I argue for is to lower these expectations of what people need to do in order for you to feel like they have a proper or an adequate social life, because it's not your life to dictate, and it causes people legitimate distress sometimes. Let them sit in the corner of the yard and read, right? If they wanted to talk to you, they wouldn't have brought the book in the first place, and the book is probably better company. They're probably enjoying it more, right? But why, just why? But yeah, that's yeah, I tried to my best to explore that in the book. I mean, it's very hard to do in writing, because it just seems like, sort of first world problems complaining. But no, there's something more there. There's a way that the expectation can feel like a form of tyranny. That sometimes you just want to scream. you know Let me be alone to think. Let me alone to just leave me be. And I don't know what a culture of leaving people be would look like in the workplace, or outside of the workplace. But maybe people can change at a level of attitude, and extend one another grace that sometimes people aren't always in a condition to entertain or be entertained.
Yeah, right on. This kind of relates, in some ways. I mean, you in the book you talk about a lot of the things that drew you into academia, the pieces of it that you like. Obviously, your father was a professor, and I think your mother became a teacher too, right? And, and so, you talk about that and talk about, basically being almost born into academia in some ways, but certainly that was an aspiration for you, very early on in your life. Um and of course, you also, talk about many of the things that you really struggled with in terms of academia. And one of them, um, is this thing that's, I think, really challenging for a lot of folks to kind of navigate, unless they're just totally comfortable with it, which is, um, kind of this idea of like personal branding, building a brand. And, this is like a lot of how, folks engage social media. And I won't totally extract myself from it because as a podcaster and a creator, and, these are the, I try not to consciously think about it in that way. I know some people do. But there's a certain level of where my engagement with these things does produce a expectation of, who I am and what people want me to do and expect me to do, et cetera, et cetera. And specifically, though, I think this is interesting with regard to people in the academy because, um, it's become much more. I mean, obviously, it's relatively new, historically speaking, but it's become a place where academics, you know, are, you know, talk about things and respond to things and offer their analysis. Historian here, that kind of thing. And, you know, um, and this is how they get, you know, speaking gigs or, build their brand, right? But also, when something happens that people look for a scholar on X or Y, right? Where are our Palestine scholars right now, right? This is, and so this is, and you mentioned this, you connect it to your repression, because obviously this was a moment where you certainly could have leaned into, that as a kind of brand, because of how much visibility, your firing from University of Illinois had, um, and you write, repression is brand equity. Um, so yeah, I mean, I and you also get into, like, how kind of the stuff that came next, right? The speaking tours, the article placement, book deals, and selling yourself in these ways, like, how transactional that sort of can all be, and it's all part of academia just broadly. Um, so, how I guess, thoughts on this, and also, like, how are you navigating that now to some degree, I guess?
Mm. This is this is difficult for me to work out. So I'm begging patience of you and whoever might be listening in. I'll try to give a cogent answer, but it's difficult for me. And part of the difficulty is not figuring out how to talk about it without sounding smug or whatever. But you know, first of all, for those who see a crisis happening in the world and turn to the academics, I would advise them, you might as well just go ask Ja Rule. Like, I mean, you're not, and you're gonna get just as good an answer. Where is Ja? Do you know what I mean? That's kind of the level that you're working with. So because there's a reason for that. There are plenty of fine, outstanding, deeply intelligent professors and teachers on social media. The ones who get the huge brands are not among them. What they're good at is being extremely careful. About using the right language, focusing on the right issues, leaving little breadcrumbs, right back to the ruling class, right, and to the managers of brand equity that they're safe. So you can sound radical, and very often they do sound radical, but they put enough hints in there for those who are paying attention, to make it known that in the end that they are tethered to orthodoxy and thus safe and thus worthy of promotion, right? They're thus worthy of entering into the better spaces of the algorithm, let's say, right? And I've always found it difficult, because I agree with you that, yeah, I mean, when we use social media, we're obviously cultivating some kind of brand, whether we want to be or not. Like, somebody will think of Jared, even though that's not your handle, and they'll get an idea in mind. Okay, this is the sort of thing he does, right? Steve, this is the sort of thing he talks about. Okay, he's going to talk about Palestine, and that becomes my brand, whether I want it to be or not, although I have no opposition to it. But I think cultivating a brand at a level where you're starting to earn some significant income always is going to come with compromises. It just is, especially with some of these pop academics who end up with hundreds of thousands of followers, and then commercial book deals and these sorts of things. And so I mean, I would just suggest that we need to be critical consumers and understand what their limitations are, and even better, figure out what it is that they're doing that is so agreeable to the ruling class and to tastemakers in general. Why this person and not the other person? Why is this collection of scholars, or academics or activists on Palestine always seem to get promoted? Why do they always get the limelight? While a different set of scholars is all but ignored, right? And there are reasons for that. Nothing is an accident in terms of what gets promoted and what doesn't get promoted. But when I look back at my experience, after 2014, I had to do a good amount of media, and I was always uncomfortable with it. And I remain uncomfortable with it, in part because I don't think that I'm very good at it. I don't like talking on the fly. I like deliberately picking my words, and so I'm afraid that I'm always tripping up or being incoherent, such as now, for example. But I like to be deliberate. I like to sort of suss out what I'm saying, apply the right word to a particular feeling, and so I've always found it a little bit difficult and intimidating to speak on the fly or to debate things on the fly. But also, I just didn't like the environment. To this day, I don't like doing these sorts of things. Present company excluded. I mean, this is my second time on here, but there's just something about doing a podcast circuit that's there's no inherent problem with it. It just doesn't match up with the way that I feel comfortable generally communicating with people, right? And so I find people who I like and who I trust, and I think in the end that's what it comes down to, is a matter of trust. I have to trust that my interlocutor is a decent person, has good intentions in mind, and I don't want to feel like I'm being exploited or being put into community with people that I find distasteful. And so you get recruited, I guess, when you get notoriety. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. If I could just, if I can speak freely without creating bad feelings with other people. In 2014, 2015, when I was, when I was infamous, when I was sort of a big name, I guess I recoiled at how many people wanted to sort of recruit me into their little political communities. And they always want something from you. So they want social capital from you. And I hated that. They were interested in me insofar as they could derive something from their interaction with me. And I hated that. It made me feel tremendously alienated. And then of course, the infamy went away, the fame went away, and then they went away as well. And I know that shouldn't be hurtful, right? Because you understand, like, that it's transactional from the get-go. But I don't want to relate to human beings in that way, and it is hurtful. They want you so long as you can do something for them. And I don't know. That's not how I want to have friendships with people. That's not how I want to be in community with people. That's not how I want to do politics with people. That to me flies in the face of all reasonable notions of solidarity. And so I always just kind of avoided that. But I'll tell you, like, people get mad. Like, there's a whole crew of like little sock dems, who have all, by the way, proven themselves to be a bunch of shithead weasels after, recently around Gaza, who sort of invited me, into their world, and I didn't want to have nothing to do with them because I didn't like them, right? And then they get hostile to you. All of a sudden, you'll see them on Facebook talking shit. Do you know what I mean? Like they get really mad, and so it's almost like this kind of mafia mentality that we're going to do you a favor, and we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. Become one of us, or you're going to be sort of banished altogether. I don't know. I'm rambling, but that's just kind of my experience. That it's very transactional. People are very deliberate about who they invite on to these podcasts, and who they avoid, right? And very often it has to do with the aspirations of the host themselves, right? It has to do with the kind of brand they want to build, and it has to do with what kind of audience they want to attract. And very often I find that it doesn't really have much to do with ideas or with discussion, or with meaningful debate. That it's just a whole lot of, it's very cliquishness and clubby, and all of these sorts of things. And it's not something I ever really wanted to participate in. If I think that somebody is serious, somebody cares about ideas, somebody has compassion in their heart, it's a joy, it's an honor for me to talk to them and be in conversation with them. But I have to feel like that it's not transactional, that people are interested in community. And so I'm always apt to really, I'm responsive to people who don't who don't have this like huge presence on online, because I don't feel that I don't feel like the culture of subscriptions, and this culture of cliquishness really does very much politically. I mean, I don't know what you and I are doing politically right here by having this conversation, but at least it's a conversation that isn't reliant on some ulterior motive, or tacit agreement about what kind of political consumers we're going to become. And I sussed that shit out like immediately back in 2014, when I was very in demand. I sussed out the transactional nature of these sorts of things, and it bothered me deeply, continues to bother me deeply. You know, yeah, that's such a roundabout answer. And it's thank you for allowing me to demonstrate why, one of the reasons why I feel uncomfortable in these environments. Sometimes I tend to go to from point A to Z with and forget the rest of the alphabet.
No, that was perfect. First of all, anyone who comes on our podcast to say shit weasel and express that towards social democrats is always welcome here. And so, so thank you, Steve. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, I first of all, I appreciate that, and it's something that's very tricky, you know. It's I think you're touching on something that I struggle with navigating around, because obviously, I mean, there are certain ways whenever you're doing this kind of work where, if you're not paying attention to things that have some level of visibility and recognition with people, and like, um, stories that people are interested in, then you are kind of dooming yourself to, like, total irrelevance on some level, perhaps. And so that's always been a kind of balance for us, I think, of saying, we don't want to come off as not caring about important events, or certainly, struggles and, tragedies and so on that are going on in the world. But I'm totally with you in terms of, being able to find your home in these places and not have them be based upon, um, a very it's super transactional. I mean, I've had guests on also where I feel like it's very much for them about brand building, and their, um, scoring points in certain ways, um, and that where it's clear between the lines of once we get off the air or before that, that like there isn't much of a relationship there, and there's not going to be. And I don't usually work with those people very many times because, it's just not. I'd much rather work with people where we're both appreciative and enthusiastic about having conversations with one another. And so, anyways, I also would say that I very much appreciate, Steve, that that we're in the company of folks that you are comfortable talking with, and I appreciate, and I think the audience appreciates, the honesty and the openness around that, even if you feel like you're rambling, but you really weren't. So, I just want to say that. Um, well, I want to talk about something fun here. So, talk about some of your favorite interactions with children as a bus driver, or even just favorite aspects of driving the bus. There's this great story, for instance, that you share, um, where you like took a wrong turn and come down a street the wrong way, and so you would have to, as I understand it, drop the kids off on the wrong side of the street, and they'd have to cross the street, and that this is a violation of your route and your codes and all of this. And the uh, you have an interaction with the parents around that I thought was really wonderful. But maybe to tell that story, and then anything else that you want to share in terms of positive memories from that experience.
Thank you. Yeah. So I was driving in Northern Virginia, much of which is ethnically diverse, and so people are familiar with the geography of Northern Virginia, but like it has Arlington, which is like the super bougie suburb of DC, and it's where so many of the military contractors are, and that sort of stuff. But there are parts of Alexandria that are belong to Fairfax County that aren't Alexandria City, that are really the home to a lot of Northern Virginia's working class and immigrant suburbs. And I was driving in those routes, so it's a difficult place to drive because there was a lot of traffic. A lot of the streets were tight. It took a good amount of skill, to get through some of those areas. And the kids were very unruly. It was, they were just unruly, and I loved it. And I'm not capable of being a disciplinarian. Whether it's with school children or college students. I just let it rip. Have fun, talk your shit, do your thing. But every time I messed up, and I messed up a lot, I would just have this oh shit moment. Like I don't know how I'm gonna get out of this one because I'm driving this massive vehicle, and I just can't flip a Yui, where I did that once, by the way, in the middle of a 4-lane street. I just looked around, there's nobody there. I just flipped the Yui, and I was just praying. And I also think I got caught running a red light once by a camera. It went from yellow to green, the light, and then I could see the flashing as I was going through, and I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna end up with a note in my file here." But anyhow, in this particular instance, we're not allowed to drop kids off on the wrong side of the street, meaning that if their house is on this side of the street, then the door of the bus has to be on this side of the street. You cannot drop them off over here and let them cross the road. All right, they're very strict about that. I mean, for good reason. It makes sense. And so I took a wrong turn, and there are all these parents. They were all East African, or 90% East African. It was an Eritrean, Ethiopian, Somali neighborhood, and they're all like standing waiting for their kids, and I'm just like zooming by, and the kids are all like and banging on the windows, and their parents are looking like what, and I'm just driving by. I'm like driving by, like like wait, telling them to hold on, and I'm just desperate to find a place to turn around. Finally, find like a parking lot. Manage to maneuver the bus around and turn it around. And when I get there, like all the parents are like, "WTF? Like what are you doing? Like you kept driving by." And I was like, "I can't drive them on the wrong side of the street. I'm so sorry. I'll get in big trouble." And all the parents are just like smirking, and laughing. Laughing in that friendly way with me, not at me, let's say. And they're saying, "You can drop them off. We're not going to tell on you. We're not going to rat you out." And that was like completely new to me, because I've been snitched out so many times in academia, right? Like people were snitching, man. Like they're snitches in this
Yeah.
industry. Do you know what I mean? They'd be running to the chair, and I mean, shit, the academia's filled with Zionists, and nobody is a bigger snitch than a Zionist. Do you know what I mean? They be snitching about everything. They make up things and snitch about them, right? But here it was just again this cathartic moment. Like, wow, he's right. I'm for all intents and purposes, I'm in Africa right now, right? They, they're not gonna, they're not gonna call up the county. I mean, like the bus driver broke a rule. It was fine. It was fine, and they were amused, but it was always like that. With the kids, there's so many Spanish speakers and Arabic speakers and Pashto speakers and Amharic speakers, and I think my favorite memories are just talking about language. I still, Kotrube is sit down in Amharic. I learned that my first job, a month on the job, and I'm probably mispronouncing it, but I would use it all the time, and so it was just fun. They would teach me all of these words and phrases in their languages, and when we pulled up to the school, they would have to be summoned off of the bus. The elementary school teachers would open the school door, and then the kids would get off the bus. So we're always sitting there for 10 minutes, and would just walk up and down the aisle playing rock paper scissors, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and I have to admit I took kind of an evil, perverse pleasure in just getting them all amped up, and then sending them on to their teachers. here, you, here you go. Here are 75 kids who are like super hyperactive. Have fun. I'll see you at 3 o'clock. It was just dealing with children, and it's a joy in every possible way. And I miss the hell out of them. I really do. And I think back on it, I'm like, man, see a lot of these kids have graduated high school or they're full on adults now, and sometimes I sit and I wonder, I wonder what became of them. I hope they're doing well. I hope they're making good grades. You become invested in them, and all of my colleagues were the same way. The school bus driver can sometimes seem, mechanical. They open the door, they shut the door, they drop the kids, but no, they very much get invested in the children, and derive joy, from their interactions with children, and want the children to do well. And I really love that ethic of the job, the idea that, the children are under our care, and we have this very big responsibility to make sure they get from point A to point B safely. And so all of those things I miss about it.
I appreciate that. Um, so, you know, another thing you're home, so there's a pandemic hits, right? And so like you said, you'd been doing it for maybe 18 months or so at that point, maybe a little more. And you're out of work basically, right? Because you can't there, especially in the beginning, there's no, everybody's grounded, everybody shifts to online school. You have the struggle of, which I relate to very much, of working with a kid on online school, which I think we all know now, which is like, especially when your kid's younger, but even, I mean, my oldest was in, I think, 5th and 6th grade primarily during the pandemic, and I mean, and I should say, pandemic I know is still going on. The days and the period in which our government actually acknowledged that it was going on. Um, uh, and like your book, I think, reflects a lot of how many of us felt, which is that there's some incredibly meaningful time that we got with our families during the pandemic for those of us who didn't have to go be frontline workers somewhere during that period and were forced to not be able to spend that time, with their kids. Um, and, I had that experience as well. And also, it was incredibly challenging to juggle these things, especially, I mean, I think for anybody, but you're trying to write. I, have done some of that and also do a lot of my own work. And like, your kids are restless. They don't have friends. They're struggling with this, kind of social collapse, I guess I would say, in some way, of like, they're not out playing with their friends on the playground every day or connecting. And so their connection is limited and they get bored, of course. Um, and So you wrote about this. I didn't like having a job contingent upon the permission of cultural elites or social media tastemakers. This problem seems more and more common under late stage capitalism. Raising a child and writing books were supposed to be meaningful, and yet both could feel incredibly alienating. Life was filled with unfathomable ambiguities. I could be profoundly satisfied, and in the next instant, restless and disaffected. I came to understand these vacillations as the normal social life of unemployment. And I just wanted to share that this the whole section and this whole period resonated me with me. And I should say, like, that in many ways this book is really, I think, a beautiful love letter to your family. I mean, I think that you say wonderful things, as you already said, about how, much of a soldier, whatever we want to say your wife was, in terms of, holding down everything that she did, and your parents, in terms of their understanding about the different periods that you were going through, switching careers and everything else. But yeah, I mean, talk a little bit about these struggles that you're identifying here in this section.
Mhm. Yeah, those are the most difficult but most meaningful passages to write. You know, I think part of the difficulty I had, in shifting careers, going from professor to bus driver was like I had broken some kind of covenant with my dad, or that I had disappointed him, and so I carried those feelings of guilt and shame. And I realized that, I'm proud of what he did. I'm proud of what my parents did. That obviously there are problems. Not every household is perfect, and I started thinking about my son in that way. That, well, I guess that's what I want more than anything. So, of course I'm proud of him, but I would like to be the kind of person that he can be proud of. And it comes with this mixture of pressure and guilt. So during the pandemic, yeah, mine was he was in second and third grade when the online schooling happened. And so easier than kindergarten, no doubt, but definitely not optimal, especially having a dad who doesn't know the first thing about computers. I remember, like, just stomping around the house, being like, "Are you sure that microphone is off?" I don't want your whole class to hear what I'm saying. They're gonna send the police over here if I have 8-year-olds listening to me. But it just, I guess it was hard because I wanted time. I wanted time away from the child. But then I felt guilty about it. It's like, no, he's gonna grow up and you're gonna say, "What the hell was I thinking?" I wish I could get that time back. And so I was just sort of vacillating between this weird space in between the present and an imagined future. And then in the imagined future is tethered to an imagined past, and so it sort of screws with your sense of time. And yeah, I was just sort of floating through the days, not quite knowing what to do. There was no specific sense of purpose. There was, in a way, too much time with my wife and child, and yet not enough time with my wife and child. So it was just that, and I dare say it was a similar situation and a similar set of ambiguities for a lot of people. And of course, I was extremely fortunate in many ways. I wasn't stuck inside the house with an abusive spouse or an abusive parent, or some other violent entity, right? That I was stuck in a house with two people who I love and like, and we all get along well. So I know that a lot of people were in horrible situations where the whatever abuse that they suffered was going to become increased and more intensified. But nevertheless, it was this moment where you have to kind of confront exactly what you want parenthood to be, what you want it to look like, what its parameters are going to be, how it's going to function, how you want that relationship to develop, how you intend to look back on it, what kind of seed do you want to plant for the future, and those are all incredibly difficult questions for me to answer, and I probably still don't know how to answer them. But at the time, I could not avoid a constant feeling of regret in the moment, before the event that was to be regretted had even taken place, and in that sense, I found it very, very difficult to to make sense of my situation with my son. It's I want him to grow up and be strong and healthy and to be a good person. That's what really every decent parent wants. But I don't know what I'm going to do without him. So I'm this pandemic is sort of making it all happen at once. This is your chance to invest your time and your energy and your emotions into this creature who is the only thing in the world that makes you feel completely comfortable and completely happy and completely at ease. But he's a creature that's always changing and growing, and it's not always going to be that way. Right? And so I think that there was this sense that, okay, time is going to pass, this pandemic is going to end, the doors are going to open again. And what happens at that point? What happens when the doors are open?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that yeah, I mean, I deeply relate to what you're describing there, especially that imagined future thing. Like, I'm constantly, yeah. I mean, my oldest is 15 now, and so it's like, it's like now I'm at the point where, well, I'm not cool anymore, so it's like, can I get a little bit of moment where I'm cool and we're having fun together again? Because I know that those, I mean, and again, like, it's also, it's, yeah, it's based on my own anxieties, because it's sort of based on this idea that, like, we won't be able to have fun together when he's an adult, right? Like, or that, you know,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but it is sort of this feeling of, like, I don't know, like, preemptive mourning, that's sort of constant
Hmm.
in terms of, like, and it can be very kind of, it, I don't know, it's not really a helpful feeling, because it leads you often to sort of inaction, or, to being too self-critical about certain things, and, I don't know, it's tough. I struggle with that too.
Yeah.
Um
I mean, I imagine if there are any psychotherapists watching, they're probably like, I need to bring Steven and Jared in and give them a talking to. They're both being ridiculous, but no, it's I feel exactly what you're saying. That's yeah. I mean, it's a huge responsibility. You don't want to screw it up, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna remember this to share with Laura Shihai next time that we have a conversation on mental health, and we can what are Steven and I dealing with here? Um,
Yes. Yes, yes, please do. Yeah.
um, all right, so I figured out after reading the book, so the cover at first I was like, "Well, what is, like, why is this the cover?" And then I realized you go on this great rant about cul-de-sacs, and, like, so talk about cul-de-sacs as a
They
bus
are
driver.
a bus driver's mortal enemy because they're rarely big enough for the bus to turn around on. One route I drove had a metro bus, a Washington metro bus. That's the bus that takes people to and from metro stations. Both the metro bus and the school bus, my school bus, were in there, and it was just a hell of a time trying to get in and out, for both of us, because we were there at the same time. But in like Northern Virginia, like most suburbs, are just filled with cul-de-sacs, and if you drive a bus into one, and unless it's an unusually big cul-de-sac that doesn't have anything in it, no cars parked on the street, no basketball hoops or whatever else is there, you're screwed, right? You're not getting out of the cul-de-sac, right? You can do like maybe like a 15-point turn, but I'm telling you, backing up a bus of any sort is not easy, not fun. Maybe the big transit buses. I don't know. Maybe they have cameras in the back, like cars do when you put it in reverse. But school buses did. We weren't that high tech, right? These are very basic machines, and so backing it up is terrifying. It just is. But then I started thinking, okay, as a driver of this enormous vehicle, I hate the cul-de-sac, but I began to hate it for other reasons. And I started thinking about the way that, and I'm sure just tomes and tomes have been written about this already, but I haven't read any of them. So, I came to this conclusion independently. So I'm gonna give myself a little bit of credit here. It's like when you get a great idea and you're like, oh, such and such philosopher discussed that 150 years ago. It's like, I was born at the wrong time, damn it, I could have been famous. But no, they're disconnections. They're supposed to be, and this is their attraction, to home buyers. They're self-sustaining communities in a sense. Not self-sustaining, that's not the right word. They're hermetic communities. That's the right word, right? That you don't go to the cul-de-sac unless you live there. Nobody's driving through. There's no through traffic. And I guess you're up in Philadelphia. I'm sure the Philadelphia suburbs are exactly the same way. New Jersey, 90% of it is the same way. Really any suburb or exurb, they build it with the cul-de-sac because that's what the home buyer generally wants. It's considered desirable, and so it drives the property values up. And if you know anything about suburban people, you know that they are obsessed with property values. That's when like that's when the mask always comes off. By the way, when it comes to their kids' school and property values, right? That's when, that's when all the liberals turn into like straight up like hood wearing. Do you know what I mean? Like they just drop all pretenses. So you know what I mean? Like don't mess with their property values and don't try to integrate their schools, right? Then they'll just go ballistic. But anyway, good tangent there. They're desirable precisely because they're inaccessible. They keep the riffraff out. you know you don't get people from bad areas going to, again, you only go to the cul-de-sac if you live there, and if you live there you're obviously of the right social class to begin with, right? You have the right pedigree, you have the right income, you belong there. Otherwise there's no point in being there. And in fact, right, if anybody who doesn't belong there shows up in a cul-de-sac, right, and just parks their car there along the curb and sits there, public property, right? If it's a cul-de-sac with the public property, all right, that the city owns the street, then somebody in that cul-de-sac going to call the cops within half an hour, right? So in that sense, they're completely safe, but they also foreclose the possibility of community. Look at look at Google Images from above at any suburban area. Look up Fairfax, Virginia, or I don't know what the hell the suburbs in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Cherry Hill, New Jersey, whatever. And look, and you can see that the houses that they build, the townhouses, apartment buildings sometimes are physically close together, but they're like inaccessible from one another because each one is in the back of a different cul-de-sac. So, you can have like two houses that are only about 50 yards apart, but there's a creek running through them. There's a fence separating them. There's like a forest separating them, a road separating them in some cases. And so to get from one of those houses to the other by the road, sometimes you have to drive like a mile or a mile and a half. So they completely foreclose the possibility of community. They completely foreclose the possibility of street life, right? And living here in Cairo, like it's impossible for me to imagine living in a place without street life now, because everything is always like vibrant and chaotic and happening, and I love it. I love the sights and the sounds and the smells of just people just sitting in plastic chairs, on the sidewalk chit chatting. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't happen in a cul-de-sac, and the suburbs are inoculated against it, and they're inoculated that way on purpose. If you look at the underlying attitudes, right, that make those sorts of things desirable. It's not just privacy. They always say privacy. Well, privacy from what? You know, what are you trying to avoid? Who are you trying to avoid? You're trying to avoid street life. You're trying to avoid just sort of a public engagement. Basically, you're trying to avoid Black people. You're trying to avoid immigrants. You're trying to avoid poor people, right? You're trying to avoid anybody who you don't think belongs in your particular social class. And so the architecture of the suburb is constructed to facilitate that desire, thus the rise in property values. So those are all my problems with the cul-de-sac. I have practical issues with them as a bus driver that ended up morphing into philosophical issues with them, and what they kind of do to, to community life. They really stop it in its tracks, and it's by design.
Much appreciated. I will say I'm gonna say I have a similar thing that Chirimacha brings up here, which is like my neighborhood that I live in is so old that it predates the cul-de-sac, I think. And so it's a little bit more I mean, there's still plenty of bad suburban politics where I live for sure. Um, don't get me started. um, but but that is I feel like this has happened more with newer development. You know, it's like the kind of McMansion places, these planned developments that they do. Yeah, like you said, they love the cul-de-sac and to create these little. Yeah. Anyway, I appreciate that. I think you're spot on in that analysis. And I haven't heard it from anybody else. So I won't pin it back on a philosopher 150 years ago. So I have one more question, and then I'm going to open it up. And folks, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to get to at least a couple or a few. I recognize that we're talking a lot about the book, but people also may have other questions for you, Steve. And so, it
Anything.
definitely would, welcome that. So, in closing, you wrap up with the kind of decision and the transition back to the academy. And obviously this was a difficult decision for you. There are many important reflections in this book from someone who's been targeted by Zionists working in the academy, and the kind of calculations you found yourself making. You uh, I think, tellingly, movingly, thought a lot about others in your life, right? And how such a decision like this would impact them, your family, et cetera. Um, and so I encourage anybody who, which could be any of us, to read this book, to think through the things that you're laying out. And again, it's not that this is a guidebook. I mean, this is your own personal experiences and reflections, and it's not going to be generalizable to everybody. But I think it does. You do really examine a lot of things that you confronted that I think people will have to confront, right? And then they obviously make their own decisions about how they would deal with them. Um, so talk a little bit about that, about the decision to return to teaching. And I think teaching is probably, you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, is more maybe the thing that drew you back than other aspects of the academy, perhaps. Um, and yeah, and what that was like and how it has been, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I felt really welcomed in Egypt in general, and at AUC in particular. And so I'm deeply grateful of the people in Egypt. They're good humored, they're friendly, they're hospitable. They've been really good to me. And people on campus have been really good to me, and it means a lot to me. It makes it easier to go to work, because I've been so accustomed to going work and sort of looking side to side at whoever's side eyeing me or snarling at me, or it's been the opposite of that. But I guess, I like teaching. I needed something to do. So part of it was practical. It's like, okay, I can go back to the bus, but this job came up. Let's give it a look. It might be good to get back in the classroom. And I'd missed it. I'd missed it in my head and out loud. I'd been telling people, I'm done. I'm done with this industry. And that was, I mean, partly I meant it, and partly was a rationalization. And beyond the practical aspect, it was partly defiance too. It was defiance that led me onto the school bus. It was defiance that led me back into the classroom. Like, no, you're not keeping me out of here. Try. Do you know what I mean? You're gonna kick me out again. So you know, take your stale jokes and shove them up. But anyway, and part of it was the possibility of getting out of the United States. I'd really I don't want to speak for my wife. I think she feels similarly, but I would let her explain it on her own. But for me, was more or less done with the United States. Just what a mess. You know, there are wonderful people there, wonderful communities and individuals doing amazing things, but they're doing it against increasingly difficult odds. And it just began to feel more and more like a police state, you know. And I guess for a lot of people in the US, it had always been that way, you know, but I guess it was becoming more and more explicit. They were hiding it less. There's no, you know, there's just no sense of public welfare whatsoever. All the money goes to people with guns, you know, to police departments and to the military to go commit atrocities abroad and at home, and just precious little awareness of it, you know. And yes, you know, we get stuck in our own bubble of leftist communities, you know, generally online, and then it makes you feel like you belong to a sizable group of people who deplore these things in the same way that you deplore them. But in your day-to-day life, you don't feel it. You know, you don't feel it when you go to the grocery store. You're chit-chatting with the neighbors or anything else. And being in Northern Virginia, especially, it's just, man, I am surrounded by military contractors, military people, Pentagon people, you know, defense industry. It's just, you know, I was just skeeved out constantly. So there was that. But I'm still like, now that I'm back at it, I'm still not used to it. I still feel a little bit weird when I get to my office. You know, when I go into the classroom, maybe that's a good thing because, you know, I guess I'm not taking it for granted, whatever that means. I say, okay, you know, you're getting the opportunity to go teach this class. You know, do your best, make it work. But I also came in with a different attitude than than I had in 2017 when I left the profession. You know, it had been 5 years since I taught, and you know, I decided that I'm going to be a different kind of academic worker. I'm going to devote more time, nearly all of my time, really to my students, and that's what I do. You know, I don't really socialize. I don't really hit the town. I'm not into the this and that of academe. I'm very classroom oriented. I still try to make time to write. I'm always going to make time to write, but otherwise, I really pour all of my energy into the classroom work, into the students, into the pedagogy. You know, and you know, I find a lot of satisfaction in doing that. I'm not, you know, I don't worry about like going to conferences or doing scholarly article or, you know, X, Y, and Z. To me, it's first and foremost a teaching job, and I do the service that I'm obligated to do. You know, I want to, you know, to carry my weight there as well. But otherwise, you know, outside of the classroom is generally a lot of noise to me.
Right on. Um, well, I'm glad. I mean, I just want to say, like, I'm happy that you've found, meaning in your place there, and that it feels good. Certainly, you deserve it, as we all do. Um, so I'm gonna pull up a few different things. So these are just comments from the chat. Where is Ja? We hate a shit weasel social democrat. Steve always underestimates how much people connect to his rants. I would co-sign this absolutely. Um, I appreciated this too. Alex had a lot of great comments. How to be ancestral. This was about this discussion of, um, thinking to the future, and then your futures, imagine future based on imagine past, etc. Like thinking, I appreciated that there. A lot of other folks too, thought that really appreciated the discussion. And Yeah, I'll lift up Malika's comment too. Thank you, Steve. Love to hear you. Grateful to your integrity and commitment to justice. Um, so a lot of love today from folks. Again, folks, I do have one question here I'm going to pull up, and I think I'll come up with something I can ask. But feel free to ask another one too, if folks have one. So Alex did ask if you had hesitations about returning to academia, and also what you miss most about driving buses.
Well, thanks, Alex, for tuning in and for the for the great comments. I really appreciate it, and really don't encourage the ranting. It's going to end up being bad for everybody. I need people to rein me in, not to encourage me. But oh, I had so many misgivings about returning. There's a section of the book where I write about it. I just had this fear, like I'm going to get there on the first day, and or be in my first department meeting, and it's going to occur to me like, what the fuck are you doing here? Like, what are you doing? What? Why? How? What? Are you nuts? And that kind of happened during the first department meeting. I just like, I'm so unaccustomed to this now. I'm still not acclimated, and maybe that's a good thing. I'm not acclimated to the way that academics tend to talk. And I'm not, I have let me get this straight. I have lovely colleagues. I have wonderful colleagues. I'm really lucky in that way. We have a small department. I like everybody in it. We all get along well. They're good people. They're good teachers. But just, you could say, maybe the customs of rhetoric in academe. I'm still sort of getting used to it. I'm getting used to the layered questions that they speak with, and the I guess the the constant, yeah, nuancing of what I consider to be very self-evident and straightforward points, and so I'm still getting accustomed to that. And yeah, I do miss the bus driving. I don't know. I mean, I've quit trying to predict the future. I don't know. Like, life is going to lead me where it leads me, but I think a part of me believes that I'm gonna do this for a while, get myself financially good again, but maybe set up some retirement funds, and maybe go back to that school bus one of these days. A lot of people do it in retirement or in older age, and I might end up being one of those people because I do miss it. I ride a bus. It's not a school bus, obviously, to and from AUC. Because AUC is way out in what's called New Cairo, which is about 15, 20 miles east of Cairo, the old city. They're building out into the desert, and so they bus people, faculty, students, employees, from all over the city, and it's a big sprawling city. And so at the end of the school day, there's what are those things called? Like not a terrace, but an outdoor, like not a cabana. I don't know. My brain is turning off.
Uh,
Where the
Percola?
Something like that, yeah, right? Like an outdoor shelter. All right, where
Yeah.
the bus drivers all gather to smoke, and so that's where I go. And and I have my cigarette, and I'm dressed in my, like, I'm not super formal, but obviously I'm a professor, and obviously I'm a foreigner. All right, and they're all like cutting it up and smoking and laughing, and my Arabic is pretty poor, right? But I know exactly what they're saying. Like, I just know exactly what they're saying. I know exactly what they're talking about, right? I know everything about it, and I'm like, well, this is a community that I don't belong to anymore. To them, I'm just some, like some random foreign professor. They're certainly not going to be mean to me. They're going to be perfectly kind, but they're not going to loop me in. And so I do have this kind of wistfulness, like, man, I miss this. I miss the peace of just driving. Do you know what I mean? Just being on the road and paying attention to everything surrounding me, trying to keep the bus in one piece, and the kind of alertness that it requires. And it's at the same time like an alertness and a relaxation. So I miss all of that. I miss the school children. I miss them badly. So yeah. I miss it, and so maybe I'm in this liminal space. I don't know. A lot of us are in it, where they're you know what you have is never quite enough, right? But you also don't want to fall into the trap of romanticizing different professions and different aspects of life, because certainly it was a job that had its own challenges and difficulties as well. So I'm just trying to make sure that I stay focused on what I'm doing and do it as well as I can, and be as good a teacher and a colleague as I can, and try to treat people, compassionately and humanely, whether it's the bus drivers, before I go home in the afternoon, whether it's my students or my colleagues or anybody else. And so I'm still going through that same mental process that is described in the book of trying to figure out how to be really how to be a decent human being, and deriving a politics from those ideas of decency.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, and I also think it connects, earlier to what you said too, is it's like, uh, knowing that you can always be a decent human being and that you can always, like you said, have a exit plan, have a backup, right? I think that also enables us to be more decent, in places where, that maybe comes at more of a premium because it's not rewarded, it's not, so yeah, I appreciate that. So some great questions came in. So, Deborah Kodish asks, curious about, would love to read the novels you mentioned in the book. Any plans to publish this? Sorry if it was covered earlier. Just briefly mentioned at the beginning, that you do have one that's coming out in May on Common Notions Press. But yeah, talk about this question. Maybe say a little bit about that book. But if there's other novels too, I don't know. I mean, you do talk about being a novelist in the book, which I have to say, like, it was kind of, I chuckled a little bit because I think about people in my life who have said they're novelists, and you're sort of like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sure." But at the same time, I also recognize that I also have to tell adults when they ask what I do, that I'm a podcaster, and that's, probably a few rungs below on the totem pole
Yeah.
of how people respond to that. So, anyways, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, well, thank you, Deborah. I'm grateful that you popped in to listen. Yeah, so the first of them is that the first one that I wrote. I actually wrote it during the period that I was driving the bus. Is It's called Daughter Son Assassin. It's coming out with, as Jared said, a press that's based in Brooklyn and Philadelphia, an amazing independent press that I hope everybody will check out. They do a lot of political and academic books, also, or really a whole variety. They're publishing in a lot of genres. They're high quality. They're well designed, well edited. It's called Common Notions Press, and so it's coming out. I think I want to say May 25th, but sometime in May. I'll put an announcement out, as the date approaches, and then yeah, I have some lined up behind it. I don't know what's going to happen to 'em. I guess we're going to see how this one goes, but yeah, it's something that I want to keep doing. I found it. I found it. I don't know the right word, but writing in that genre was a different way at getting, it's some of these fundamental questions that don't always work, in nonfiction.
Yeah, right on. I'm looking forward to it. This is a link. I put it in the chat for folks if they want to check it out. You can pre-order it
Thank you.
here. And a link to the book we've been discussing also is in the show description as well. All right, another question. Um, well, this is a comment. I just appreciated this. My dad worked as a professional career for years and now drives a school bus. He loves it and gets the best holiday gifts. Um, so right on. Thanks. All right.
Shout out Target gift cards.
Yeah. Right on. So this is a very, this is one of those tricky, very broad questions. So, favorite radical books, anything you recommend to your students?
Wow, that's a good. I'm terrible at remembering the names of books and authors offhand. So I'm afraid I'm just going to give up a bunch of cliches. I'm actually teaching Fanons on violence next week. Um, just got done teaching Robert Warrior's famous essay, Canaanites, Cowboys, and Indians, a Native American perspective. It's Canaanites, Cowboys, and Indians. I don't know if I would classify it as radical, but it's radically important. A look at that. notions of indigeneity and then liberation theology. It's fantastic reading, and I would recommend anything by Robert Warrior in general. I feel like I'm going to start naming people off the top of my head, and then inadvertently piss off other people who I should have named. Trying to think of some of the things that I don't necessarily have a go-to book, but when I think about things that always end up back in my mind, you know, um, when I'm working and thinking through some of these issues, I'm a big fan of Amilcar Cabral. His collected essays and speeches are really good. Anything that has to do with the transcription of Malcolm X's speeches is super important to me. Yeah, I'd mentioned Robert Warrior, Hanani K. Trask, the indigenous Kanaka Maoli, the Hawaiian writer, the late Hawaiian writer. She did some really fantastic work. I'm a big fan of Walter Rodney. Also, has been a pretty significant influence. Really, I guess I like to work in kind of the revolutionary traditions of the global South. There's a newish book uh, by a translation of Hassan Kanafani's on Zionist literature, and that was published by I want to say Ed Books. I'm not sure. I wrote the forward to it, but yeah, there you go. And I would highly recommend that. Oh, there's a lot of stuff, but anything that's dealing with the dual but interconnected issues of anti-imperialism slash decolonization and anti-capitalism, I think are and revolutionary politics are things that I kind of gravitate towards. But that's what comes up off the top of my head. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it's a great list. And yeah, it's on Ebb Books with the Liberated Texts, imprint,
That's it.
the
Yeah.
on Zionists literature. Shout out to Louis Alday as always for his work. Um, well, I guess I don't have other questions right now, but actually no, I do have one. Let me pull this up. Um, so curious about pedagogy. What does a classroom you teach look like? Super grateful for this conversation and your whole being.
Um, well, that's very kind of you to say, Jim. I hope I didn't butcher your name. Thank you. Ooh. So I think a classroom that I teach, starting a year and a half ago here in Egypt would look chaotic and unmoored, but there's actually a philosophy behind it that I talk about it a little bit in a piece I wrote about Chat GPT last year, because I came back to academia just as Chat GPT was coming into existence, which was terrible timing. You got to roll with the punches. But I had decided, but before I started here at AUC, that I wasn't going to emphasize grades. And I know there's nothing new about that. I understand that. But at a place like AUC, the students often have a hard time wrapping their mind around it because they're very grade oriented. And here, in the Arab world, even at an American university, the grading tends to be very strict and very rigorous. There's not much of what Americans would call grade inflation. But I decided that I wanted them to be free, or at least feel free to discuss ideas that are meaningful to them, to think about what kind of world they live in, then also to think about what type of world they want to live in, and then spend some time on what happens in between, right? What's missing from the world that you live in and the world that you want to live in? Not only what's missing, what needs to happen, what needs to occur. And I want them to think in that particular area. And so I encourage them to really just to connect whatever textual material we're reading to something that is meaningful to their social or political lives outside the classroom. So And it also depends on, the makeup of the students. Sometimes I get very rowdy groups, and sometimes I get quieter groups, but all of it is emphasized around discussion and ideas, and I try very much to de-emphasize grades or to de-emphasize anything that is punitive. And so I see, the grading and, the assessment sort of stuff, 'cause universities are obsessed with assessment now, and AUC is no exception. I really try to marginalize those things and create an environment where we're thinking through things together, where we're allowed to be curious, where, they're allowed to question, you know my opinions, or to elicit, my points of view, and I happily tell them, if they ask. And so it's, in some ways, you could say it's a very political classroom, but it's a classroom that is purposefully structured by its lack of structure. And I don't make students talk. I always just like that when I was a student. And if you caught the the first part of this conversation, right, with Jared, then you'll understand why. But I believe in, the idea that you can communicate very well just by being present, right? You can communicate ideas very effectively just by listening, and by paying attention and providing an audience for somebody else's ideas. And so I just, yeah, I try my best to, to make it a place where people can sort of come into the conversation, or leave the conversation according to their preferences and their predilections. And I try to move away from any kind of, proselytizing or indoctrination, but I do want them to think carefully, about, the assumptions that under the unrecognized assumptions that underlie their beliefs, and to think very carefully about, what they think, or what they want their responsibilities to their fellow human beings, and to the earth and to other flora and fauna to be.
Yeah, that's great. Um, Jubin asked if you have read like a loaded I think it's like a loaded weapon actually. I'm guessing, which is about the Rehnquist court, Indian rights, and legal history of racism in America. Are you familiar with this text?
I am familiar with it. Yes, I read it. I want to say I was either in grad school or early career, but yeah, I read it. It was super helpful. Yeah.
Right on. All right. Stevie had a question. Said thank you. Been a lovely couple of hours. What are a few things you love? Very low stakes question. Don't think too hard. Sometimes it's just nice to hear people speak about this in spite.
I mean, I love my family. I love my comrades, in struggle, the ones that I know personally, and the ones that I know online, and the ones that I've yet to meet but hope to meet one day. I love Palestine. I love the people of Gaza in particular. I love, you know I love their spirits. I love their minds. I love their resilience. And I was thinking about this the other day, that, and I actually was trying to form a tweet out of it, but I couldn't quite do it. I was thinking about how anti-Zionism is always conceptualized as a form of hatred, and we know that that's not true, but it was bothering me in a particular way, and I was thinking, it's like, no, I mean, I'm not anti-Zionist out of hatred. I'm anti-Zionist out of a place of love. You know, and that place is both real and imagined, and it has a name, and it's called Palestine. And so I really, I love anything that gives us a better possibility of allowing the meek to inherit the earth, allowing people who are unfree to get free. And it's yeah, you know those are kind of the things that come to mind when I think about what I love.
I really appreciate that. And I think we'll kind of start to wind down, but I do wanna, because we have you here, and because of the state of, the genocide that we're witnessing, also, of course, the resistance, the resilience, the and also, I mean, obviously one thing that you've talked about throughout this to some degree is, um, just I don't even know what term to use to properly degrade the entity of the United States in its electoral, you know, theater, basically, right? That we see, um, and the kind of, all of the psychological warfare that they produce to, um, you know, convince people that somehow continuing to provide endless weapons to, you know, this war to Israel as they're enacting this genocide is, somehow a cause of some morality or worth or something. Um, so I don't, yeah, I mean, I don't have, again, like, I'm struggling, I'm rambling, I don't have a clear question here. But I'm just, yeah, whatever you're thinking about currently, I mean, in any of these spheres that you would like to
That
kind
you would
of
like.
talk about them.
Yeah, like, I mean, like a lot of people, I'm thinking about it a lot, and the hopelessness, the feelings of helplessness that come along with thinking about it, and in terms of what I can control, as a U.S. citizen, and I can stand firm. I mean, it's not gonna liberate Palestine, but I'm not giving any quarter to genocide heirs, period. And I'm not entertaining any kind of scare tactics or pressure politics, and I would encourage my friends and colleagues to do the same. That you don't have to argue, with liberals. And remembering, I think, just liberals who people who are at least implicitly supporting a genocide, supporting the mass starvation of innocent people, right? Who are supporting the destruction of acre upon acre upon acre of residential building, of crops, of everything, right? You don't have to answer to them, right? Somebody tells you that you need to vote for Biden, you tell them to take a walk. You got nothing to say to them. You have nothing to justify to them. All right. You don't even need to interact with them. Right. I mean, you can argue with them if you want. I mean, I'm not gonna, tell you not to, but you're not obligated to. Right. The only thing you need to do is say, get out of my face. You know, you're a genocide heir. You know, go talk to somebody like you who doesn't have a heart. I have a heart. All right. And so I'm not giving an inch, nothing, to anybody who is in any way complicit in what's going on in Gaza and in all of Palestine more broadly. And I don't care if that's a supposed comrade or not, that the lines are drawn. We didn't draw them. Right? The oppressor has drawn them. They've drawn them very clearly, but we have to adhere to them. Right. They've already told us what they think of us, what they think of Palestinians, what they think of the value is of Palestinian lives, what they think of the value of Palestinian children. They think of the viability of the future of Palestine, and you don't have to entertain it, you don't have to listen to it, and you don't have to be guilted by anything. That's the first thing that we can do, is just hold firm and remember that the Democrats are not our compass. US liberals are not our compass, right? Intellectuals are not our compass. The people of Palestine are our compass. And our thought about what we should do and not do needs to start with them. Right? You put your emphasis there, right? You put your mind there to the best that you can. You put your heart there, right? And then you see where it leads you. But you don't need to start with the US political system, which is rotten and broken, as any sort of ethical or political baseline, because that's going to take you no place good.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Appreciate it. Um, I don't see other questions in the chat. Thank you everybody for listening in, for your comments and interactions. Steve, if there's anything you want to say in closing, I certainly welcome you to. It was again, I really do enjoy this book. I do encourage people to buy it, to read it. I look forward to your forthcoming novel and hopefully to more conversations like this with you in the near future. And yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for dropping in. I hope it's hard times, and I do hope that the book keeps you some good company for the duration that you're reading it, and I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, right on. Thank you again, Steve. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. Absolutely. We'll see you all soon.